misconception. I had an at&t iPhone, and then after 2 years I got a Verizon because everybody said it was better. And literally, I feel like I'm Thomas Edison trying to have a conversation with people, and it's over $100 a month.
Yeah.
What gives? I'm on Lakeshore Drive. It's not like I'm in the frontier area.
I love the passion in your question.
Susan, could you repeat?
Yeah, the question is, thank you very much. The question is, here I am on Lakeshore Drive. I'm paying more than $100 a month for cell phone access. I've switched from at&t to Verizon, supposedly the national leader. And yet I feel like Thomas Edison trying to make the very first electrical connection. Calls drop, the standard is very low, and we're used to crappy wireless connections. We sort of assume we're going to have to call each other back. This has happened because these guys are in harvesting mode. They've built their networks, they've made their investments, and they're just reaping. So at this point, even though data usage is climbing exponentially on these networks and crowding out some calls, which is why you're dropping calls, they have no incentive to upgrade the connections to their towers that should be fed with fiber, these big capacity pipes. They have no reason to do that because it's in their interest to just keep prices up and keep profit margins as high as they are. They're pleasing Wall Street. So their capital expenditures are way down. For the cell companies, there's something like 14% of annual revenue is then plowed back into their networks. Most of what they get from us in terms of profits goes into buybacks, dividends, goes to their shareholders. Again, they're serving the interests that make sense for them, and they have no particular incentive because they're under no competitive pressure to do so, to upgrade their cell reception network. So that's what's happening. That's why. Yeah.
How come we're not seeing any use of antitrust law, and they can't use the courts, use Congress?
Yeah.
And it's what I'm disappointed is that Obama simply has caved, the administration has caved into those companies.
So the question is, why aren't we using antitrust law and the courts, all the other levers of policy that we have? And the question is disappointed that Mr. Obama appears to him to have caved into these interests. Right now, on the political scene, there's no particular upside to taking these guys on. This is why this needs to get on the radar screen of more Americans, because if a senator or representative sticks his or her neck out, they just run the risk of not being reelected, because these really are very powerful players. If the FCC tried to do anything dramatic, right now the incumbents would just march on the Hill and get the Appropriations Committee to gut the budget of the agency, cut it in half. And so it feels to the FCC like World War III to take on these issues. When it comes to the cable guys, who in the 1997, they call it the Summer of Love. They divided up their systems. They clustered so that you take Minneapolis, I'll take San Francisco. And you might say, well, where's antitrust law? Why didn't anybody go after these guys? Well, they never intended to compete. They weren't actually setting prices. Antitrust law protects competition. It can't actually create competition. They were just horizontally dividing up their markets. If you want to create competition, that's a matter for industrial policy. That's where regulation comes in. That's where we say the country as a whole, everybody in America should have 100 megabit per service, symmetrical service. That's where we should be. You set that standard. We had the phone service that led the world by doing this kind of thing. You set the standard, and then we say, how are we going to do that? We have to subsidize some rural areas. We'll have to create competition in urban areas. We're going to have to drive demand and capacity for it. The world's fairs were created to drive demand for electricity. We thought at first that electricity was just for street lamps. And so not until we saw what it was capable of did it take off. So a combination of all of these things needs to happen in America. Making it cheaper, getting capital into these broadband networks, having policy support competition, and ubiquitous, very fast, world-class service, and ensuring that if you care about these issues, you still can sit on Capitol Hill. That's what needs to happen. Yeah.
I read something about one of the companies starting to sell their iPhones at the full purchase price and then not tying you into a contract. And I was wondering if you think things will go more that direction and more like in Europe where you'd have a SIM card that you would just take out of your phone, pop into another one, pick up another network. You know, it's so easy there to switch providers and switch out. I wonder if you think that that's something that we'd ever see here.
So the question here is it ever going to be easier to bring your own device to a network and easily move between carriers? Because as you lower barriers to switching, you hope that more people switch. Here's the problem. Even that is now true with T-Mobile. You can bring your own device there, and not subsidizing devices with long-term contracts definitely lowers the barriers to entry and barriers to switching. But AT&T and Verizon have such advantages in their spectrum holdings that it costs T-Mobile 4 times as much to build out its network as it does for AT&T and Verizon, because they have to build 4 times as many towers. So there are other competitive barriers. And also AT&T and Verizon are gaining customers all the time and growing by leaps and bounds, and T-Mobile and Sprint are not. So the market power of AT&T and Verizon is really tremendous at this point. It would probably take more than just being able to switch your device to bring more market power to Sprint and T-Mobile. It would take greater access to spectrum for them. It would take greater investment in them. So I have hopes that SoftBank investing in Sprint will make that stronger. But certainly, the absence of long-term contracts would help. They right now have no incentive, the big guys, to do that, because they've got you. They've got you, and they've got this wonderful thing of share everything plans, where you have a bucket of minutes, the whole family sends it. And that means that your aunt is going to try to talk the nephew into joining that plan. It's like a family marketing device. So things are going very well for them right now, AT&T and Verizon. In the front, yes?
Isn't the core of the problem here that there's such a high barrier to entry with the initial network creation costs? Doesn't that mean that the best way to solve this would ultimately be some sort of government-financed infrastructure creation system that then could be appropriately leased out and made available to private companies on an equal basis?
Right, so the question is, this is really just about money. The barrier to entry is the very high upfront capital-intensive cost of building a fiber upgrade for the country. And the traditional solution for that in other developed nations has been government investment. In America, we just have this tradition of using private companies to provide services. What we're looking for, therefore, is the set of incentives, some subsidies certainly, where in areas that are just uneconomic to serve, but the access to capital and lowered policy barriers, making it a better business, even for private businesses to enter. Right now, both the policy and the access to capital is operating against competitors showing up. So it's those barriers that I'm trying to enter. It is hard for me to imagine our federal government actually running a high-speed internet access network. I'm not sure they'd be good at that.
No, I don't think they would be good at it,
Yeah.
but creating it and installing it is another story, or financing it.
Financing
the
see,
creation.
I think the financing is really important, and I see that as loaning money most of the time, and then it does get paid back. Stockholm saw, they built this wholesale fiber network, and then all the costs got paid back for that pretty quickly out of lowered costs for government communications and business spillovers of all kinds. So a loan program, I'm with you. I think there'll be a bunch of different solutions. America's a big country for the thing as a whole, but we do need to remember that Eisenhower was a Republican president who said we need an interstate highway system. Had we relied only on the market, we would have gotten a few narrow roads between particularly popular places. And you just can't do it that way for these large infrastructure inputs, which are needed for everything else we do. So this is just like roads and water and electricity. Anything else? Anybody else? Yes. Yeah.
What's the role, excuse me, of, and I don't know exactly the details on it, but Congress has set the possibility of spectrum auctions.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of similar to his question about you can build a new network, but is the spectrum auctions and sort of innovating our way out of the problem perhaps with, spectrum and how's that going to play?
Okay, so the question is, there's a big bang spectrum auction coming up soon. Is that going to fix the problem? I'm suggesting to you that the basic problem is a fiber upgrade for the country. We don't have a path to make that fiber upgrade. Fiber policy is wireless policy, because if you have a lot of these high-capacity wires all over the place, your device can connect to them, because what you're experiencing making those calls from Lakeshore Drive is the last 50 or 100 feet of a wire A wire has to come deep into your neighborhood, right there so that you can connect to it. And the problem with the drop calls is that the carriers have no capacity, no incentive to build big wires to their towers. We also have no incentive at the moment set up to build fiber for the whole city so that we can all be making more wireless calls. Where there are rich fiber connections, we could have 4 or 5 LTE competitors that would be quite successful with that infrastructure there. So I care about spectrum and I write about it quite a bit, but I see the wireless story as just complementary to this really basic problem of not having enough fiber in the country and no path to that upgrade at the moment, no policy path. That's awesome. Yes?
Well, the Telecom rewrite is on the horizon, the federal rewrite there. I guess nobody is really tackling it right now because it's kind of a can of worms. And here in the state, we're also looking at a rewrite of our telecom bill and our cable laws. The cable folks want to do away with having to give anything back to the local communities. AT&T wants to get rid of the landlines. And I've been trying to talk to the folks in Springfield about having some basic regulations in place and saying if you want to play ball in Illinois, you need to give back something, some percentage that goes into a digital inclusion fund. Something. We need to, parts of Illinois are without access. We have a million people without public libraries. So it's kind of a have and have not space. And you've heard that my friend who is a have on Lakeshore Drive, that has a nice space, she doesn't get adequate service. So I guess what I'm wondering is, are you going to be talking to any of our legislators while you're here? Are you involved in advocating? Have you been called in to talk to some of these guys to open their eyes and help move us along?
Well, wherever I go, I try to talk to regulators and legislators. The risk of asking for a quid pro quo from these giants is that they just run you over. And then they say, well, here's the particular quid pro quo I want. I'll give you a kickback on my video services, but not for broadband. And that doesn't get us where we want to go. So the deal making, the question was basically, there's a lot of legislative efforts in the state. What are you going to do about that? And every time we legislate with particular incumbents in mind, they win. They win. And so I don't actually want to see a rewrite of the 96 Act. I think we've got a perfectly good statute. It just needs to be used. It was set up to allow for exactly what I'm talking about, and it's been overridden by regulatory weakness and a lot of litigation. So I'd say let's go ahead with what we've got. When it comes to the state laws, we clearly need much more consumer protection at the state level. People need someone to call. And for emergencies, we saw this in Sandy in New York in spades. Those networks went down. Nobody knows what the outage numbers are. Verizon took the occasion to rip out copper from downtown so that it could avoid competition in downtown buildings. Even a hurricane is an opportunity for these players. So the states need to be much closer to consumer protection. I'd love to see that. But I want to see a lot more cooperation between the feds and the states. They have a joint interest in making all of this work better, and instead there's still lots of turf battles about who does what, and I'd like us to get beyond that. Yes?
Did the telecom bust and outsourcing affect, what our situation now of raised revenues and infrastructure network scarcity?
So the question is, did the telecom bust, so this was when we told ourselves we overbuilt fiber, too much fiber across the country. Does that relate to the scarcity that we're seeing now? The answer is no. There are parallel and interesting developments. We did build a lot of fiber. That's all really old now, and its capacity is getting used almost entirely. Between big cities, it's getting really crowded. What I'm talking about is actually, we need a fiber upgrade now for the entire country, and particularly in the last bit between people's homes and businesses, really, in the last miles, what they call it in telecom jargon. But scarcity is possible because of market power. So Verizon and AT&T, because they have no incentive to compete. They don't have to upgrade their capacity. They want to make money on overages and keeping scarcity in place. Makes sense? And Comcast and the cable guys have an interest in continuing to raise their avenues, make more money from the same number of people, is what they're doing. And you can do that when you have market power and no competition. So we've just got the worst of both worlds. We've got no competition and no oversight, and it's that situation that I'm worried about. Looks like I have time for just one more question, so in the back there, yeah.
What Google is doing in Kansas City, why wouldn't something like that spread across the country?
Well, first of all, I don't think we'd want to have one private company subject to no oversight, building fiber everywhere. That's just not a good situation, because they then can raise prices, squeeze out competition, do all the things that I'm worried about our current players doing. But the idea of having fiber networks that are closely overseen by cities and are subject to competitive, needing to provide space for competitors, that's a great idea. I really do think Google is that World's Fair I was talking about, because people are going to see what it's like to be able to operate in a world without interruption, where communication is just assumed, it's like water. And that's what changes people's minds. And when you get enough of those local networks visible to Americans, we will become disgusted with the current state of affairs, and something will change. Right now, I'm waiting for that news from Google, because we need to see that visibly. We make progress when we see things. So I'm available afterwards. I'm delighted to sign books, delighted to talk to you one-on-one. And I see that Craig is energetically jogging up here. Thank you for your attention. It's been lovely to be here.
Thank you, Susan Crawford, and thank you, Alyssa, for your assistance and our partnership with the Roosevelt Institute. It's been a pleasure having you both. Susan will move out into the lobby next to the bookseller, where she will be happy to sign books. Books are still available for purchase. If you've been so moved, you're welcome to buy a copy, and Susan will sign it for you. Also, I'm happy to tell you, Susan, that the library has several copies in its collection, but don't run out for it because they're all checked out. And there's a long hold list for them, which has automatically generated additional purchase orders for your book for the library due to its popularity. Thank you all for coming.